just feet everywhere. Hey everyone, it's Anthony here at Talk and Review, and today we're looking at Quentin Tarantino's 9th movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So Once Upon a Time in Hollywood stars Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, and somewhere in there Margot Robbie as well. The plot of this one is really quite difficult to explain because there doesn't really feel like there is a plot to this movie. Basically, the movie follows Rick Dalton, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his stuntman, who is played by Brad Pitt. So Rick is basically a failing actor in the golden age of Hollywood. And all the story really is following these two around whilst Rick comes to the realisation that he's not as big as he used to be and how he deals and copes with that going forward. That's essentially the plot. I didn't enjoy this movie. It is a very long movie. I think it's 2 hours and 40 minutes long. And you feel every single moment of it. And that's mainly down to the fact that, like I said, there is no plot to this movie. So there doesn't feel like there's any story or any movement going forward. It's just things that are happening in the life of these two people. So it's very hard to kind of get engrossed into the story because there really isn't a story to get engrossed into. Mainly, I'm just really disappointed. I went into this movie with really high expectations. I'm a huge fan of Quentin Tarantino, and when you've got three huge stars such as Margot Robbie, Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt in the movie, you kind of get the sense that this movie should be a success. There should be at least something to like. And I think that's another reason why I feel so disappointed by it, because nothing happens. You've got all this talent, all this potential, and they do nothing with it really. The acting is good in it. I don't think anyone has come away from this movie and said that the acting is not good. Leonardo DiCaprio's acting in this movie is actually really, really good, and Brad Pitt is hilariously funny. But in isolation, those two things aren't enough to make you want to see more, because there's just nothing holding it together. If there was a good story or a good narrative that's holding those things together, you could get on board with it. But because there isn't, all it is Leonardo DiCaprio acting and Brad Pitt being funny. That's pretty much it. And whilst I said I can appreciate both of those two things, it's not enough to keep me glued to the screen for 2 hours and 40 minutes. In fact, I think it was only about 30 or 40 minutes into the movie where I actually started to look at my watch. And by that point, I knew it was doomed, because if it's not grabbed me by the first 30 or 40 minutes, that's it, I'm done. And by that point, like I said, I felt every single moment of this movie. And it's just a shame. Now, Margot Robbie plays Sharon Tate. Now, if anyone knows who Sharon Tate is, they will know that she got brutally murdered by the followers or the family of Charles Manson. Now, this movie is set at the same time as that is happening. And in fact, part of it is actually incorporated into the movie. I won't go into too much detail because they do kind of dive into that a little bit towards the end of the movie. But another source of disappointment in this movie is unfortunately, it's Margot Robbie. She has absolutely nothing to do in this movie. Yes, she plays Sharon Tate, and yes, that is I wouldn't even call it a subplot, it's just a thing that happens in the film. She is part of it, but that's pretty much it. And for someone as talented as Margot Robbie and someone as high profile as her to have such a minor role in this movie, and they're using it as a huge selling point, look at Margot Robbie in this movie, it's very misleading going into it, because she doesn't really have anything to do in this movie at all. And again, like I said, it's another source of frustration and disappointment, because you want to see her do something. She's been in really, really good roles up until now, and you want to see her in good roles. But unfortunately, this isn't one of them. Throughout all the movie, it just felt like Quentin Tarantino was picking on things that he personally enjoys, and he has adapted them into a movie, pretty much like a lot of his films. But the differences between them and this is his other films have a plot. What he's done is he's picked out things that he likes about previous movies, about movies in general, and he's just placed them into this movie and mashed it all together. And that's what it feels like. It doesn't feel like a film, it just feels like a mishmash of things all together, because the director likes those kind of things, and it just doesn't make for enjoyable cinema. Quentin Tarantino's foot fetish in this film is ridiculous as well. I don't know how many scenes there are of bare feet, but I know that there are a lot of bare feet in a lot of his movies, but in this one it just seems to be ridiculous how much foot is actually in it. And there's no specific reason why it doesn't play into the scene in any real way at all. Just feet everywhere. Also, within its little kind of story, if you want to call it a story, there's a lot of things that happen that just don't make sense. Or if a different director was doing it other than Quentin Tarantino, people would absolutely slate it. There's a lot of things that happen in this movie that lead on to something that just completely cut off and don't tell you why it's happened, where it was going, or what the point of the whole set piece is. I'll try and not spoil anything here, but there's a particular scene with Brad Pitt and he goes and meets someone that he used to know. Now he's having a conversation with this guy and it keeps on building tension, and then it utterly goes to nowhere and it makes the whole conversation completely redundant. And this conversation goes on for a good 10-15 minutes or so. There's a little bit of comedy in there, it's not too funny, but ultimately the conversation goes nowhere and you're no further on towards the end of the conversation than you were at the start of the conversation. But it builds up tension the entire time and I can't understand why. It's been over a week since I've watched this movie and I've pondered over it quite a while and I still can't find a reason why. There's also cutaways in this movie, like there are in most of Quentin Tarantino's movies, but there's one cutaway in particular, again involving Brad Pitt, where it goes to explain something that's happening, or may not have happened, and then just doesn't come back to it at all. Like, at all. So you have no idea what's gone on, and like I said, I feel like if this were a different director, if this was someone else other than Quentin Tarantino, and they put that in their movie, it would be slated because it's unfinished or it doesn't make sense. But I feel like because Quentin Tarantino is as quirky and as strange as he is and what he's done in his previous movies, people allow him a pass. And especially with this movie, I just don't think I can be that forgiving with it because there's a lot of it, like I said, it just doesn't make sense at all. And it's just really, really frustrating because it's a long movie and you're waiting for a payoff in a lot of it and it just doesn't come. The only thing that's, for me, that was even remotely enjoyable was probably the last 10 or 15 minutes of the movie. That's when it felt like they were following on from any form of plot, and this is what I mean when it involves the Sharon Tate story. Because you're familiar with it and because you know what it is, you kind of know where it's going to a point. So it follows a linear path, whereas the rest of the movie doesn't. And that kind of makes up for the majority of my enjoyment out of the movie, the last 10-15 minutes. It's very over the top, it's very Tarantino. So if you don't like Quentin Tarantino, you probably won't like what happens in this. It's very overzealous and ridiculous, but it does make for enjoyable and comedic cinema, which is kind of what you want from a Tarantino movie. But because it's only the last 15 minutes, it feels like it's weighted to leave it to the end, so you go off on a high note for how boring the rest of the film is. And I can't wholeheartedly say that last 10-15 minutes of enjoyment makes up for the rest of the movie being as boring as it is. I've spoken to a lot of people about this movie and there's very mixed opinions on it. I got a lot of people that like it, a lot of people that hated it, and I think it's very divisive. I think it's either you really like it or you really hate it. There's no one that I've spoken to that's in the middle and they say, yeah, it's okay, but yeah. In this one, I'm struggling to find reasons why people enjoy it, and people have been explaining to me they like the comparisons of how the film is shot to Golden Age cinema, which I saw a few elements of that, but again, didn't really do much for me. And there's just little things here and there that people like that, again, it doesn't really make up for why this movie is a good movie, because it's getting such heavy praise through critics and through audience, and I just can't understand why. Maybe I'm missing something, but I've spoken to, like I said, both parties. The majority on the whole, they don't like it. So I'm not too sure why. Who knows? Maybe I'll never know, but you know, I'm never going to watch it again to find out. Put it that way. I'm not going to put myself through that again. Also, on a side note, I don't think Bruce Lee was that much of a I'm going to leave it there because I think I've said enough about it. I didn't like this movie. I don't honestly think I could recommend this movie to anyone. If you don't like boring films, don't watch it. If you like films that don't really have a plot or a narrative, this might be for you. Who knows? But yeah, I wouldn't really recommend it. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got a lot of reviews coming out in the future. Don't forget to ring the bells. Make sure you check out our Facebook and Instagram account for regular updates as well. And we'll see you for the next review. Peace!